The most pleasant thing that has happened since I started talking out about this administration on LinkedIn is that I can live with myself. I am actually doing something, saying something, putting up my fist and saying, I do not consent. And I'll tell you, that makes me feel a hell of a lot better than suffering in silence.
Hi, it's Elena.
And Chris.
From Citizen Rebel, the podcast for founders, small business owners, and bold influencers who refuse to stay silent.
And those of us who want to do the same. That's right. What's going on right now is crazy. And there's people out there that are speaking out and saying something and, living an uncomfortable life as a result. So we want to talk to those people.
And some of the people, it's uncomfortable at first to say something. This is what we're finding. But once they've said something, once they've hit publish on that content, speaking how they really feel about the Trump administration, they feel relief and they feel comfortable in finding their voice and that they can, actually sleep at night.
Right. Until the MAGA trolls come back every 6 weeks and hit old posts again.
The MAGA trolls are... it's funny because I have been out publishing content now since I was 26 years old. I was a single mom. I had a blog about being a single mom. And the first comment ever left on my blog, and I had published this post with extreme care. It had taken me days to write it. I was writing from my heart. I was like, hey, there's nobody else out here who I found who's experiencing what I'm experiencing. I'm a single mother. Hello, world. And the first comment that this person posted, the first comment I ever received was, I hope you die alone with your cats.
Wow.
Yeah, it was. And I remember at the time that being my first negative comment. Again, almost 20 years ago now. I was devastated. I was a mess. I could just hear it.
You can hear celebrities. They talk about it like it's a real problem. And even we know these are dumb psychopathic trolls out there just getting a tickle out of having people get upset. It still really hurts.
They leave their comment and they crawl under the bridge. That is why we call them trolls, because they go and hide. And I tell that story, I tell it now because to anyone listening who's thinking about saying something, you do begin to let it roll off of your back. And it does take time. But we are here to help you through that. If you're thinking about publishing content and you need a cheerleader, just message us on LinkedIn and we'll be there for you. But over the years, as I kept getting these negative comments, and my blog grew and grew in popularity to the point where I had like 1 million page views a month. It took off. But I finally figured out that when you take the negative, you turn it into a positive by republishing it. So when you pull the trolls out from under the bridge, and what I did was take a negative, someone had wrote me a horribly negative letter written to me of just what a horrible, unchristian woman I was, and I was going to burn in hell. And I took that letter and I published it. And you know what happened? That was a post that resonated with so many of my readers, and they started to comment and defend me, and themselves in turn. But when you take it and you pull that troll out from under and you expose them, it works. There's a lot that Chris and I are going to unpack throughout the season. And today we are really excited to get into this topic. We're going to talk about posting anti-MAGA content with Parry Headrick. And he is the founder of Crackle PR. Crackle PR is a very big company with a bunch of fancy clients. And Parry is not a person who you would expect just looking at him. He's a very buttoned up professional white man that you would expect him to be taking these really strong stances on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's really surprising. It's not the type of person you would expect. And I think that's got some people's feathers ruffled. So it'll be interesting to see what he tells us about.
Yeah. The posts are challenging the administration left and right, but also from his perspective as a business owner. So we're really excited to welcome Parry to the show today. Hi, Parry.
It is a pleasure to join you. And I'm glad you said I had fancy jobs. That was important to me. I'm kidding. It's not important to me at all.
It's all about the work, right? And doing what you love. Yeah. I'd love for you to set the stage for our listeners who don't follow you on LinkedIn, and maybe for those who are listening and not necessarily even watching, but really set the stage and describe yourself and how you ended up making that decision to take a political stance on what is typically considered not a political platform.
Yeah, so it's a big question and it's not an easy answer. I am somebody who has always been kind of in the background relative to politics. I never really drew a hard line in the sand about my affiliations until I think the Trump era. I think for somebody like me who is in the business of perception, which is really what public relations is, it's easy for me to kind of see what that man is trying to put out to the world and the perception he's trying to make of himself. When for somebody who helps build people's perceptions and personas, it's just so patently thin and shallow and false to me. You just look at the evidence related to what he's done in his business, in his personal life, whether it's bankrupting casinos, whether it's stealing money from kids' cancer charities, whether it's burying an ex-wife in his golf courses. Like the man is a little bit wild in his attitude, his bombast, his sort of charismatic malevolence, I guess is the way to describe it. And so I paid attention to him sort of in an entertained way in the early days when he first joined the first race the first time, thinking there's no chance in hell America would fall for this, like complete nonsense, no chance. And we endured what became the Trump presidency, and we watched his bungling of a million things, not least of which is the death of, many thousands of people during COVID. And in just a very short period of time since Trump has regained power, what we've seen is a wholesale erosion of many of the foundational pieces of our democracy.
A lot of the stories are unbelievable, literally, that, this
Correct.
keeps happening. And as a PR professional, having that lens on it, I'm sure it is more obtrusive or intrusive to you and your view. But what was it? Was it anything in particular that sparked your first post against Trump in particular? And when did that happen?
I don't know what the first one was, honestly, because in recent months I've posted several times about several different things that are just unbelievably insane that are happening right now. One of the big ones for me, being a former reporter, being in PR, was his kicking the AP, the Associated Press, out of the White House correspondence room. AP plays it about as straight down the line as you can play it. And they are, award winning for a reason. They are in there. They have every right to be in there. But if you cover Trump unfavorably, he's doing what autocrats do, which is he is suppressing your voice and kicking you out of the room. Now, that was one of the, probably 5 big things that just got me irate to the point where I was like, I cannot stay silent anymore. Like the free press is literally under attack at this moment.
It's true. So it was this year, though. Were you posting last year before the election?
I did a few posts last year as well. I think one of the posts that really got me going was I did a post talking like LinkedIn is a business platform, right? So I did a post that was like, I have a hiring nightmare story. Like I tried to hire this person who wasn't who I thought he was, even though, some friends liked him. He claimed to be, strong. He'd done the job before. But I found out that turns out he had been stealing from people and he was an adjudicated rapist. He was like this and that and that. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I meant company. I said, I meant country. But what I said was company at the front of this post. Like the whole idea was that everybody who was reading it was like, oh my God, you almost got sucked into this nightmare. But then the aha, moment at the end was I really was talking about the country and not my company. And how can you be aghast if it was my company and not aghast if it's the country I'm talking about, which is far bigger and far more consequential? I don't know where I started. It's hard to know because his days of just insanity have bled into the next, and it's been going on for 10 years now. So it's just tough to say exactly when the moment came. But I do know this, I find myself increasingly less interested in trying to convert MAGA folks because they're unwilling to be converted. You can't change the narrative that they're lock, stock, and barrel in. And that's what a cult is, and that's where they're at.
It's absolutely true. And I think a lot of what you said tracks with us 100%. It's interesting that you said that you can't really pinpoint the exact moment, but you said previously you weren't really inclined to speak out, to be very vocal. We were more in the background. And now that has changed. Once you realized that change, what was going through your head? What was happening inside?
Yeah, so I started my company, Crackle PR, with a very clear true north, which was to do good work with only good companies, like full stop. And so I started thinking about what I'm doing and what is happening in the world through the lens of my own business. Like I won't tolerate malignant assholes in my work life. I'm not going to work with them and I'm not going to hire them. And I have been vocal about that. Like that's one of the things that sort of got me a bit of an audience on LinkedIn, is that I was very, very clear that since I own my own company, I'm not tolerating that kind of behavior anymore. Like the world's full of all kinds of problems. I want to be a part of the solution. I want to work with people that are trying to be a part of the solution. And so how do you have that as your true north as a business leader and as a father and as a son and as a husband, and not take issue with what's happening in terms of the governance of our country? Those two ideas are incompatible, where I can talk about my own business and my own life, but I can't talk about how I feel about the highest levels of government. So at some point, these two ideas became intertwined to the point where I just said, what's fair game for me and my business is fair game for the government. And if you don't like my opinions, I'm sorry about that, but I'm still going to express them. It's like a Voltaire quote. Like, I don't like what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say them. Like, that's kind of how I feel about the whole Trump administration, the First Amendment, and how I feel about it.
And one of your recent posts captured that very well. It was, so we're not allowed to talk about politics on LinkedIn, but politics is now business. And you showed the stock market crashing that day. I think that's what it was, right?
Yeah, that's one of them. Sure.
Tell us about the reaction to the post. So you've told us how you got there. And you are posting frequently about our political situation right now. What, like 2 or 3 times a week, maybe?
Yeah, I'm trying to strike the right balance between, I don't want to become just the radical on LinkedIn. Like, I want to also have a business and a life and a livelihood. So I'm a little mindful of that. But I think that these two things are not mutually exclusive. I can do both. And so I'm trying to find the right balance. And the reaction to your question is, I have more followers than when I started posting about, Trump and this crazy administration, not less. So there's an audience for it. I have people that are in my DMs, like literally every single day, thanking me for having the courage to speak up, which to me doesn't feel all that courageous. It just feels like a moral imperative, like somebody somewhere, maybe Blue Sky, said something like, did you ever wonder what you would do during the fascism during the 30s? Well, you're doing that right now. And that really stuck with me. It's like, yeah. Do I really want to sit here and say nothing and look back, 6 months, 2 years from now and say, I could have said something. I wish I had said something. I wish I had done something.
Yeah. I love to dig in a little bit deeper into that balance, because I think that's at the kind of nexus of what we're experiencing with a lot of the companies out there is, like you said, it's easier to express yourself in your normal setting with your family and friends. But as soon as there's, clients and customers on the line, things begin to change, and you see a lot of people still being silent out there, we assume because of that fear. So how do you handle that?
So I think in some regards, I've attracted as clients the kinds of people who would be receptive to what I'm saying now about the current administration and the current craziness, because they know authentically, like I'm just telling you, and I've always told you for years, who I am and what I believe. So I think what's happening is that most of the folks in my orbit are viewing what I'm doing now as a natural extension of what I've always done, which is to just be the outspoken voice on a platform that was previously pretty stodgy and stuffy, and people trying to speak like they're standing atop Mount Olympus in flowing robes. And what I'm trying to do is just talk one-to-one, like I'm talking to grandma. I think for me, it's been okay. Now, having said that, I am certain I've left deals on the table because people have probably said, I'm never working with that Parry Headrick guy. He doesn't like Trump. Like, I'm sure there have been people that haven't knocked on my door, but there's been nobody that's been inside my house that has decided to leave. And I can point specifically to the last time I lost a client. It was in Q3 of 2024. It had nothing to do with politics. I haven't lost a single client since. And in fact, I've added many to the roster. I'm not saying it's because of what I'm talking about with Trump and politics, but I am saying it hasn't been detrimental. So I think maybe it's a bit of a reflection of, if you live as authentically as you can out in public all along, then if you remain authentic about new topics, it seems to be well received.
If you're in need of some killer branding and marketing, check out our agency, Good Now, where we're dedicated to purpose-driven brands like yours.
From brand architecture to websites and executive personal brand training, if your brand is ready to take on the world, but not quite ready to face the world, we're here for you.
Visit goodisnow.com for more. What would you advise the heads of major corporations, and on the B2B or B2C side in particular, and their PR teams right now, and how to handle this, especially as it unfolds? Because I think we all three agree it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So if you were in the room with someone at, say, some big silent company, you could pick on Target or another one like that, what would you tell them to do? What should they be doing right now?
So I understand that there's a lot of fear, especially at the bigger companies, that there'll be retaliation for saying things that are untoward about the administration. I mean, the evidence is everywhere that if you speak poorly of him, he'll try to come after you legally and call you a traitor and, all that. So that aside, I think the best way to start having these conversations and start voicing opposition is to focus on policy first, because then you don't have a whole swath of people saying like, well, you just don't like MAGA Trump. It's really more like, oh, he's looking after his business and his customers and his end users and, trying to do what's best economically in a democracy that thrives on capitalistic sort of leanings. I mean, that's really the key for, I think, some of the business leaders to start. Now, I wish more would focus on the morality of it and just, start pointing out just how inherently sort of anti-American and, fascistic most of this stuff that we're seeing is. But I think that's a leap too far for a lot of these folks who have shareholders to answer to and, a lot of different constituencies that they have to navigate and walk that fine line. So for me, focus on the policy initially until more people start focusing on policy, because they will. This tariff stuff is getting more people to finally start coming out of the woodwork a little bit. And then what you start seeing is a bit of a crescendo of business leaders saying like, hey, if you look around, we're all kind of agreeing this is bad. Like what is happening economically is bad. And by the way, some other things are starting to get bad too. Let's talk about those. So you got to start, I think, on the policy, on the wallet. And then from there, I think you can soften the beachheads for more difficult conversations around the ethics.
What would you say to founders or business owners listening to this podcast who are on the fence on to whether or not they should publish something or say something?
I would say you would be amazed if you started speaking truth to power, how many people would be messaging you privately to thank you for your courage and to say that you've given them hope that, the end is not near, that maybe if there are enough of these types of voices that start banding together, then we can flip the narrative here. I think what makes me feel good is that I know there are others out there that feel the way I feel. And I know there are other leaders that feel the way I feel because I talk to them privately. And to a man and woman, they're all scratching their heads and just thinking, what in the hell is going to happen next? Like no one really knows. I mean, one of the things I think that is by design from this administration is to create broad uncertainty, have people know that the only thing they can count on is chaos. And if you keep doing that and flooding the zone at all times and changing the conversation from this trauma to that scandal to then everybody will always be walking on pins and needles, unaware of what to do next because they're terrified to do anything. And what I'm trying to say is if more business leaders were to speak up and show a little bit more of a united front, then that chaos begins to subside because they become now a bit of an anti-force to that chaotic sort of fire hose twisting out into the universe. And it becomes a little more organized and a little bit more of a target for the administration to have to focus on in terms of now we have to deal with like an actual opposition. And I would love to see an organized opposition that isn't about, I don't like your hair, I think you're, a bad man, you're orange, but on policy, on ethics, on immigration policy, on all of the stuff that I think any good, decent human being ultimately knows is right. I think that's where to go.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for that from the Democratic Party. See how long it takes them to get it together. We might have to create it on our own, though, and it could come from the private sector.
I have business leaders, and in particular, I have corporate business leaders who have been at the highest levels of some of the biggest companies in America who run comms, and we're talking behind the scenes about what needs to happen. We're talking about possibly coming up with a communications plan for the Democrats because they can't seem to pull it together themselves. You know, these are early conversations, but there are a lot of people wondering in a lot of different ways what we can do and how we can apply our savvy to the situation. Because to your point, Democrats are twisting in the wind. They don't know what they're doing. And I think Chuck Schumer is probably not the best representative at this point because he's a little milquetoast and maybe a little long in the tooth to try to fight this battle in the way it needs to be fought.
Yeah, they all are. When you do organize that group, give me a call, because I ran for Congress in Ohio and learned so much about the Democrats, how they organize, how they don't organize, and a lot of intel on that front.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one thing I'm wondering, what is the most unexpected, pleasant thing that has happened since you started speaking your truth to power on LinkedIn? Something that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, the most pleasant thing that has happened since I started talking out about this administration on LinkedIn is that I can live with myself. I've been trying to walk on eggshells and just like post about typical PR things. And I was trying to figure out why I was feeling insane. And the reason is because I know there was a huge elephant in the room that I was completely ignoring. And I no longer could do that. And once I started actually speaking out and letting people know how I felt, to me, it was cathartic and remains cathartic because I know that I'm actually doing something and I'm not suppressing my urge to scream from the rooftops that this is not normal. So the most pleasant thing is that even though, again, I may have lost money as a result of this, I don't know. The most pleasant thing is that I have peace of mind that I am actually doing something, saying something, putting up my fist and saying, I do not consent. And I'll tell you, that makes me feel a hell of a lot better than suffering in silence.
That's great to hear. Can we flip it around and can you tell us what the most unpleasant thing is that happened as a result of all this?
Yeah, it's every day. You know how sometimes a post just lives on. You keep getting comments and comments and comments. So I have like probably, I would say, 15 different sort of critical posts of the administration that just keep having comments generated. And every day there's probably 5 to 10, 60-year-old white men who they all look exactly the same, pop up in my comments and tell me to go away, Trump, like, woo, like they all look exactly the same. And they are trolling my content. And I see them every day, multiple times a day. And it's just astonishing how very similar they all are. They look like they could be from the same, fraternity from like the 70s. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how does that, like, reading those comments and receiving that, like, how does that feel? I mean, if you're probably not used to getting such negativity thrown at you, right?
Yeah, I've never gotten any negativity thrown at me at all until I started talking about politics. And now it's exclusively from that same group of, entitled white males who seem to be telling me that LinkedIn is for business, not politics. But okay, it's funny that you all look the same and sound the same and are the same age telling me the same thing. You're uncomfortable that I'm pointing out truths. I'm pointing out truths that are difficult to hear because deep down that it's probably not okay to disappear people who are not illegal in this country. It's probably not okay to attack universities. Wink, wink. Probably not okay to, do half the shit that the Trump administration is doing, but it makes them uncomfortable. And rather than point out any sort of factual inaccuracy with what I've said, they just tell me that I'm a fool and go Trump and go away and et cetera. So that's been unpleasant. What I tend to do is just treat them like they do in the South and just be like, bless your heart. Bless your heart, instead of trying to engage with them or do battle with them, because it's like slamming your head against the wall. A very white wall.
And you are a white businessman and who is, successful on paper. I know the word success is weird, but from looking outside in, that probably angers them very, very much. You
one of theirs isn't on board with the Trump message. Like, what the hell? Yeah, so I think that's a part of it. I think that's a part of it, is that I look like I could be at the same country club, and yet I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. You know what I mean?
We are really, really glad that you joined us today, and thanks so much for sharing your story.
And thanks so much for doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. We need more people like you.
I appreciate that, and I suspect we'll start seeing more and more of that. I think that there are people that are trying to find a path to begin to speak out, and it's easier to do once your wallet is about 1/3 is late.
Right. So to that, thank you. And to anybody listening, if you know of a business owner like Parry on any network, whether it's Instagram or LinkedIn or elsewhere, and they are taking a stand, let us know so that we can also feature them on the podcast. Our entire mission here is just to educate anyone who's on the fence and is trying to find their voice during this pivotal moment in our history as a country. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. But if we all do say something and stand up and speak out, we will rest easier, we will sleep better at night, and maybe we can actually come out of this as one country.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Citizen Rebel. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show and share it with a friend.
To connect with us and find more content like this, visit goodisnow.com.